In 1943, the war was at its peak. The skies over Europe burned with contrails and fire. The Allies were pushing for air superiority, and every engineer, pilot, and mechanic knew that if you ruled the skies, you could win the war. Among the noise of engines and gunfire far away from the front lines, one man made a decision so small that it barely registered in the paperwork. But that decision changed how one of the greatest American fighters in World War II flew. This is the story of how a single fitter's clout nail helped the Lockheed P-38 Lightning outfly the Luftwaffe. The problem he was solving was invisible to most. The tail boom vibration that plagued the P-38. At high speeds, the fighter would shake violently, its controls locking up as air compressed around its twin booms. Pilots called it the death dive. Many never pulled out. Engineers at Lockheed were searching for answers, testing every theory they could, flutter, resonance, aerodynamics. But deep inside the factory, one fitter would unknowingly fix part of the mystery with nothing more than a nail, a hammer, and an ear for how good metal should sound. The Lockheed plant in Burbank, California was a fortress of motion. Day and night it throbbed with the pulse of war, rivet guns snapping, torches hissing, and giant hangar doors groaning open to roll out new machines. The entire building was hidden under a camouflage roof painted like a suburban neighborhood, complete with fake streets and trees to fool Japanese reconnaissance planes. Inside, thousands of workers moved in rhythm, designers, inspectors, welders, and fitters who knew that every fraction of an inch could mean the difference between life and death. Among them worked Leland Hale, 26 years old, a quiet fitter from Wichita, Kansas. He had the patience of a jeweler and the instincts of a mechanic who could hear a fault before he could see it. Hale's job was to fit together the Lightning's twin tail booms and stabilizers. It was repetitive, unforgiving work. No glamour, no headlines, but to Hale, every bolt was personal. The P-38. Lightning was unlike anything else in the sky. Twin Allison V1710 engines, turbo supercharged, a central pod for the pilot, and a nose packed with 4.50 caliber Browning machine guns and a 20mm cannon. It was fast, deadly, and beautiful, but also temperamental. At speeds above 400 miles per hour, pilots reported a terrifying vibration that shook the airframe apart. The controls froze, the nose tucked under, and the plane entered a dive that even strong men couldn't pull out of. Clarence Kelly Johnson, Lockheed's young chief engineer, led the hunt for the cause. He ordered wind tunnel tests at Wright Field, reinforced tail sections, and redesigned the elevator control system. Still, the problem lingered. Somewhere, something in the structure was flexing under stress. Hale didn't know those details. He only knew what his hands told him. One hot afternoon in July 1943, while fitting the left boom of a new P-38J, he felt an odd resonance when tapping a stabilizer plate into place. The vibration was faint but wrong, metal ringing where it should have been dead silent. He traced the sound to a mounting hole near the rear spar. The hole had been drilled a hair off angle. The rivet wouldn't seat flush. Most workers would have filled the hole and moved on. Time was critical. Production quotas were strict, but Hale couldn't let it go. He rummaged through a drawer and pulled out a fitter's clout nail, a small steel pin used to hold temporary braces. He shaped the head with his hammer, slid it into the misaligned hole, and tapped it tight. The ring vanished. The joint went solid. He chalked locked H on the inside of the boom and sent the assembly down the line. 5 days later, the aircraft rolled off the floor with its serial number, P-38 J10LO 4328476. No one knew that inside its left tail boom was a single steel nail holding everything perfectly still. By August, that same plane was shipped to RAF King's Cliff in Northamptonshire, home of the 20th Fighter Group. The pilots there called the Lightning the Fork-tailed Devil, a name the Germans themselves had given it. Der Gabelschwanzteufel. The fighter with Hale's nail was assigned to Lieutenant Charles Red Anders, 24, a quiet Minnesotan who had already seen combat in North Africa. He named his plane California Rose after a girl he'd met on leave near the Burbank plant. September 3rd, 1943. The mission was simple on paper: escort B-17s to Rouen, France, to smash German rail yards feeding the Atlantic Wall. Anders and his squadron took off before dawn. As they crossed the channel, contrails stitched the sky. Then, near Rouen, German radar picked them up. Messerschmitt Bf-109Gs and Focke-Wulf 190A5s climbed to meet them. Anders saw 319s diving straight at the bombers. He shoved both throttles forward, 1,600 horsepower roaring from each Allison engine. The airspeed needle swept past 420. Normally, this was where the Lightning began to tremble, but not this time. The stick stayed steady, the frame solid. Anders dove through the formation, firing all guns at once. One German fighter broke apart in midair. Another spun into the clouds. Back at base, Anders radioed in. "No vibration." She dived smooth up here. His crew chief examined California Rose. No cracks, no loosened rivets, no structural fatigue. He couldn't explain it, but word spread through the squadron that Anders' Lightning could dive harder and faster than the rest. Through that autumn, the 20th Fighter Group escorted bombers deeper into France. Anders became known for his aggressive dives, pushing past the limits that made others hesitate. Each time he came back, his plane was riddled with holes, but always flew true. Nobody knew that the secret sat inside the left tail boom, a nail placed by a man who'd never left California. While Anders fought in Europe, Kelly Johnson's team finally confirmed the aerodynamic cause of the P-38's compressibility dive. The solution, dive recovery flaps, would take months to implement, but by then production models had already become sturdier thanks to subtle assembly changes inspired by line workers like Hale. Fitters across Burbank began quietly H-locking tail braces, copying the tight-fit technique that eliminated resonance. January 1944, the 20th moved to RAF King's Cliff's extended concrete strip for pre-invasion strikes. Anders had 8 confirmed kills by then. He wrote home, "The old girl still runs smooth." On February 22nd, during Operation Argument, the Big Week bombing campaign, Anders led a flight escorting fortresses over Regensburg. Flak and fighters tore through the formation. At 25,000 feet, a 109 zipped in from below. Anders rolled inverted, dove through a hail of tracers, and came up firing. The German disintegrated. His crew joked that his plane ate air like it was born to it. Back in Burbank, Hale worked another long shift. He heard about the P-38s over Europe from the radio. He didn't know Anders, but he smiled when the announcer called it America's high-altitude answer to the Luftwaffe. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he'd tap a finished boom with his hammer just to hear the note. When it rang wrong, he knew what to do. Spring 1944. Normandy was coming, the Allies were preparing to invade France, and air cover was everything. P-38s were the first fighters over the beaches, their range and stability unmatched. On June 6th, D-Day, Anders flew 4 sorties strafing German convoys near Caen. He wrote in his log, "Flew into flak so thick you could step on it." Plane steady June 10th, 1944. Low clouds, light rain, mission to intercept retreating German transports near Evrecy. Anders chased 2 Ju-88 bombers skimming the tree line. He destroyed one, but ground fire ripped through his right boom. Oil poured from the engine. The radio crackled. "Crossing the Orne." might not make it. Moments later, California rose vanished into the overcast. Days later, French villagers near Saint-Pierre-du-Bosc-Girard found the wreck. The right boom was shattered. The left was almost intact. In the crash report filed months later, engineers noted something unusual. The stabilizer brace on the left boom remained rigid, the joint unbroken. It had held together through a 400-mile-per-hour impact. Hale never heard the report. He kept working. When the war ended in 1945, he went home briefly, then returned to Lockheed, helping assemble the first American jet fighters. It wasn't until 1948 that anyone noticed his initials, LH, on a production record marked H-locked brace verified. An engineer tracked him down and asked what it meant. Hale shrugged. One was loose. I fixed it. By then, the P-38 had become a legend. Pilots remembered it as the fighter that never quit. From the Pacific to the skies above Berlin, it had racked up more than 1,800 aerial victories. And somewhere among those, a small act of perfection lived on. Years later, in 1969, a Smithsonian researcher interviewed Lockheed veterans for a documentary. Hale was 52, gray at the temples, still working at Skunk Works. When asked what he remembered most about the war, he said, "A day back in 43. One panel rang wrong. I used a clout nail. After that, no more ring." The interviewer laughed, but Hale wasn't joking. He died in 1981, never famous, never decorated. But the story didn't end there. In 1983, during a recovery of wartime aircraft remains in France, technicians found part of a P-38 tail boom stamped with serial 43-28476. Inside the stabilizer joint was a single corroded nail, steel, slightly bent, still gripping the brace. It had survived 40 years. Engineers examined it. Non-standard issue, not a rivet, a fitter's clout nail. It shouldn't have been there, yet it held the structure tighter than factory specifications. One of them wrote in the margin of his report, "Simple, brilliant, saved lives." War often remembers the names of generals and aces, but rarely the hands that built their machines. The P-38 Lightning became a symbol of innovation, of American engineering pushing limits, but beneath its speed and power was the patience of men like Leland Hale, craftsmen who refused to ignore a flaw. The kind of people who make perfection their quiet rebellion against chaos. Hale's nail wasn't part of any blueprint. It wasn't planned or approved, but its spirit lived on in the DNA of every aircraft that followed, from the P-80 Shooting Star to the U-2 spy plane and the SR-71 Blackbird. Every Lockheed engineer who tightened a bolt until it felt right carried a piece of that legacy. Aviation historians still argue over what really solved the P-38's vibration issue. Aerodynamics, structural reinforcement, or pilot training. Maybe it was all of them. But there's no denying that the improvements after mid-1943 coincided with countless tiny acts of craftsmanship from factory floors like Burbank's. Hale's nail became a symbol of that spirit, the invisible art of precision that wins wars quietly. And somewhere in a museum archive today, that fragment of tail boom still rests, olive paint flaking, the nail rusted but firm, a reminder that sometimes the fate of machines and the men who fly them turns not on blueprints or theories, but on one person who refuses to let something slide. In 1943, the world measured heroes by the size of their battles, but sometimes history is held together by something smaller, a nail driven by steady hands, a sound that didn't feel right, a moment when someone chose care over speed. One nail, one fitter, one lightning that outflew the Luftwaffe, and the quiet truth that in war, perfection is another word for survival.